Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's webinar, part of our Path to Care series called Strengthening Your Support Partnerships. My name is Brian Thompson, and I'm a programs manager at Can Do Multiple Sclerosis, and I certainly welcome you here this evening, and thank you for joining us. For those of you that are new to Can Do MS, we provide health and wellness education programs for families living with MS to help them thrive in their journey. And we are thrilled to be partnering with the Society for Participatory Medicine and Sanofi Genzyme to bring you this three-part webinar series called MS Path to Care. Path to Care is a whole set of resources on shared decision-making and team approaches to MS care. And if you want to check out the other webinars in our series, as well as some additional resources, please go online to mspath2care.com. Again, this is part 3 in our series, and we welcome those of you, or this is your first time joining us, as well as those that have been here for the whole series. So we're really excited that you're here and want this to be an interactive conversation. So you'll have the opportunity to submit questions to our speakers, who will be introducing themselves in a moment here. But on your screen, you should see a toolbar, and at the bottom, there is a chat box. And you can submit your questions there, and we're going to try to get to as many questions as we can. And if we don't get to your question, I'll tell you about other opportunities that you can ask questions. Hopefully you've logged in okay. If there's any technical issues, you should call GoToWebinar directly, and their number is 877-582-7011. Finally, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our speakers this evening and actually let them introduce themselves, starting with Roz Cow.
Thanks very much, Brian. I'm very pleased to be here for this third segment in the MS Path to Care series, and one of my favorites because I have the privilege of doing this webinar with Ann Borsellino and Karen Peterson. And I've known them for 21 years. I first met them when I was a psychologist practicing at an MS Comprehensive Care Center in New York. And Ann and Karen came in shortly after Ann was diagnosed. And we've worked together in a variety of ways over the last 21 years. And this is just a tremendous fun privilege for me to be presenting this important topic with the two of them.
Hi, my name is Ann Borsellino, and I was diagnosed in 1997 at the age of 38. At the time, I was a high school social studies teacher, and I've been in education for 35 years. At my last 9 years, I was union president, and the union had 500 members to it. I am very happily retired right now and playing as much golf as I can. And I've been with Karen for 29 years, and I have to come clean tonight before we start. I'm really happy to be here, and I hope that you get something out of this webinar. But I have to tell you that one of the symptoms that I suffer with MS is not very visible, and I struggle at times with cognition and word retrieval. And sometimes I stumble along, I forget things, and so I'm going to be asking you and Roz especially and Karen to kind of put me back on track when I need it, because I am having some cognitive issues.
I'm Karen, and as Ann mentioned, we've been together for 29 years, 21 of which came after Ann's initial diagnosis with relapsing remitting MS. I work as a middle school, high school athletic director, and I hope to join Ann in retirement soon. And we both hope that you do if you can just take one thing away tonight that you find helpful, that would be great. And that's why we choose to share our story.
So again, this is the third segment in the MS Path to Care series. And tonight, we really have several learning objectives for all of you, participants living with MS and support partners, because as with all programs that Can Do does, we focus equally on support partners and people with MS. So we're going to talk about the key elements of the support partner role, what that means, and how different individuals, whether it's spouses and partners or extended family or adult children, close friends, may at different times fulfill this critical supportive role. We want to highlight what some of the major challenges are for people in this role throughout the disease course. And we're going to talk a little bit about what the foundation of a balanced partnership is, where each person in the relationship is on both the giving end and the receiving end, and each person feels supported by the other. And we're really going to emphasize, and I'm going to do this particularly with Karen's help, to how important it is for support partners to take care of themselves physically and emotionally, so that they can be as healthy and well themselves, for themselves and for the person they love and care for. So we want to do a quick poll just so we know who we're talking to. So could you please indicate which one of these best describes you? Okay, so the vast majority of you are someone living with MS. We also have a couple of people who are spouses and partners, and maybe one or two parents or siblings, and not very many sons or daughters or others. So tonight, when we talk to those of you who are living with MS, one of the key takeaways you're going to be getting is how you can support the people who are supporting you, so that it really is a two-way street. So we're going to start by talking a little bit what the research tells us about support partners, and also what I've learned. I've had the opportunity to work with many support partners at Can Do programs, because Can Do Multiple Sclerosis focuses as much attention on the support partners as they do on people with MS. And so what we know from all of these individuals, as well as from the research literature, is that support partners, by and large, absolutely want to provide the best possible care for their loved one that they can. And while this can be a very challenging role and sometimes draining and overwhelming, people are quick to tell us that they also gain a tremendous amount of satisfaction from the care they give to someone that they love. One of the things we've learned at Can Do MS, however, is that support partners have their own form of don't ask, don't tell. When I meet with support partners at meetings and I ask the groups that I'm sitting with how often people have asked them how they're doing, what their worries are, what are their biggest challenges, many people in the room say nobody. That they've not been asked, not by healthcare providers, not by other family members. Everybody is focusing their questions and their concerns on the person living with MS. And so many support partners feel that it's just not appropriate, or it would be selfish of them to talk about their own needs. And we want to make sure when you leave this program tonight that you recognize that support partners need to advocate on their own behalf. They need to speak up and ask for the support and information and resources they need to live with their major change in their lives. We know that support partners are at increased risk for depression, and for some unhealthy behaviors, such as drinking too much, or not following a healthy diet, or not getting enough sleep or rest or physical activity. They're simply very busy. They're very preoccupied with their partner's needs. I just saw Anne look at Karen. I wonder what that was about.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that support partners often feel at a loss about how best to provide help and support. So we're going to use some vignettes tonight to help illustrate some of these challenges, and you'll hear from all of us about our thoughts about these vignettes, and we'll also be looking for your thoughts about these vignettes as well. So I'm going to start us off with the first vignette, and this is about Nikki and John. They've been married for only 7 years with 2 little kids. Vicky's a full-time nurse, and John is working for a computer company as a marketing rep. Vicki was diagnosed just 6 months ago with relapsing MS. And following her initial relapse, she continues to have very, very severe fatigue. She's got some residual vision problems from the optic neuritis that she had in her initial attack, and some numbness and tingling in her lower body. So she's got a lot of annoying and uncomfortable symptoms going on. She's committed to her family and her work, and really wants to be independent as she possibly can. John, on the other hand, is feeling, whoa, like what happened here? He's way out of his element. He doesn't really know anything about MS. He can't imagine what this new diagnosis is going to do to their life together, and has no clue what he's supposed to do. And he's feeling quite frightened. Now, he wants to help Vicki, of course, but Vicki is sending a lot of mixed signals to him. 1 minute, she's telling him she's fine, she doesn't want to be babied, and the next minute, can't you see I'm exhausted, I need your help. So he doesn't know what to do, when to step in, when to step back. So now he's feeling kind of frozen because he wants to please her and can't tell quite how to do that. So he's very stressed out, and his work requires a lot of travel. So his wife and kids need him more than ever, but he's worried about the family finances and feels his work is very, very important. And at this point, he just doesn't know where to turn. So before we comment on John and Vicki, we'd really like to know what you think about how we can best help Vicki and John with the new diagnosis they're living with. So you can select any or all that apply here. Well, not surprisingly, and because you're all quite smart, they really do need all of these interventions, including education, help with their communication, knowing what resources are available, and helping Vicki be clear. I'd be curious to know, first from you, Anne, what you think at the time you were diagnosed you needed most.
What happened when I was first diagnosed, I felt like I lost total control of everything in my life. And the more I tried to get control, there were things I couldn't do to get it back. And that made me very frightened. And then also, you get depressed. I mean, whether you get depressed because you've just been diagnosed with MS, or you get depressed because you now have no control. And I am a control freak. I'm a type A personality, and I take care of everything. I'm a take charge kind of person. So that was really big for me, losing control. And it took time. I mean, hindsight's 2020. So looking back 21 years, you know, I can say, okay, this is what I should have done, or I did this right, or whatever. But it was the control or lack thereof, which was the biggest thing for me.
So how would you, at this point, with your 2020 hindsight, where would you offer help to Vicki and John first?
Well, the first thing is, it's funny because the first thing you asked, you know, who the audience was, and I think it was 93% of the people said they whatever they had, that they were the people with MS, a person with MS, and I was like, wow, I would have given my eye teeth to have this kind of a resource out there to be able to learn about MS, because I thought at that, you know, back in '97, I thought I was the only person with MS, and as things were happening to me, weird things that no one could see. You know, the tingling, the optic neuritis. I was slowing down. I mean, it was just very, very strange. Depression really just set in, and at that point, I didn't want to talk to anybody. Just leave me alone. I went into a shell, and I spent a lot of time in my bedroom, and I was like, don't bother me, leave me alone.
So education at that point and some help understanding what was going on would have been helpful, and that's what you're saying is where we should start with John and Vicki. Karen, what's your thought about where we could step in and be most helpful to both of them?
Yeah, I think the education is, things are sort of spiraling out of control, and it's difficult to sit and watch a person that you care about struggle and not really know what to do. And for me, when Anne was first diagnosed, the one thing I could do was to try and get educated about the disease as much as possible.
Yeah, because I didn't.
Right. So the person with MS may be a little bit more reluctant or isn't in a place where they can absorb a lot of information, perhaps. So I would say that Vicki and John should both go to a newly diagnosed meeting or a webinar like this. I mean, when Anne was diagnosed, I don't think the internet existed, but
Oh, it didn't.
so there's a lot more resources, but I think that that's the place to start. And if Vicki's not willing to go or be part of that education, then John needs to at least help himself understand a little bit more about what she's going through and how he could best support her.
So I think all of those things are important, and I really reinforce what you both said. I think the one thing I would add is this communication piece, because I think when two people are suddenly facing a new stressor and don't necessarily have the information they need, they have very strong feelings they don't know how to talk about, that sometimes what we can do is help them actually talk to one another. We can make it more comfortable to share the worries, the concerns. We can help Vicki learn how to ask for help when she needs it and politely decline it when she doesn't. But without that kind of open, clear communication, John and Vicki keep tripping over each other. So I think this slide really highlights all of the areas that Anne and Karen and I have talked about that would be important for John and Vicki.
So our next story is about Isaac and Jan. They've been together for 15 years, and Isaac was diagnosed with primary progressive MS. He's been experiencing a slow but steady progression of the disability, and just recently retired on disability. Isaac, despite his inability to walk very far without losing balance or being exhausted, is pretty reluctant to use any mobility aid, feels that it makes him look more disabled. So Jan has had to take on more of the physical chores. Isaac also has bladder issues and problems with sexual function. Obviously, Jan's feeling overwhelmed at this point. She's taken on more responsibilities around the house. She has her job and she's trying to help Isaac. So she's gained weight due to stress eating and lack of exercise. Probably doesn't feel she even has time to exercise. Jan's a little frustrated, feels that Isaac could take on more of the non-physical household responsibilities, but she's afraid to ask him that because that makes her look selfish. She thinks that if Isaac would use a motorized scooter, they could do more things that they used to be able to do together, shared activities that they enjoyed, and she's worried about that her weight gain is responsible for the more recent change in their sex life, but she's pretty depressed and it's just really hard for her to care about that.
So we now have another polling question. And we wonder what you think would be most helpful for Jan at this time. Jan is Isaac's support partner and is dealing with a lot of stuff. Well, I'm very, very glad to see this response. The 3/4 of the people who responded said that Jan needs a reminder that taking care of herself is essential. And then some other people talked about information related to community resources and assistance because she clearly may need help and not able to do this on her own. Those I think are critically important. Karen, are those responses that surprise you or that you agree with?
I certainly agree with them. I think it's easier said than done. So I think that it's most meaningful to those reminders to come from the person who has MS. And, you know, you should try to surround yourself with other people as well, just to talk with. But the more you're reminded of that, but when the person with MS says, you know, you need to take care of yourself, I think that's really meaningful, and kind of makes you feel better. That's really the only person that can make you feel better. You know, I think that Jan could help herself also by, you know, sometimes there's like the elephant in the room. Nobody wants to talk about the MS. We stop sort of communicating the way that we used to communicate before the person was diagnosed with MS. So, you know, if Jan could say to Isaac, I need your help with X, whatever she needs help with. And if she thinks he could do some other things around the house that aren't real physical to help her, she needs to be able to communicate that to him, not just to help herself, but to help him, because he's probably feeling like, as Anne expressed earlier, that lack of control, not being able to contribute. If she can ask him to contribute more, that's only going to empower Isaac more, as well as to help her. So I would certainly encourage her to do that.
Excellent. Anne, your thoughts about two things: how people responded to the poll that Jan needs to take care of herself, but also your response to what Karen said about that message really needs to come from the person with MS. What's your thought about that?
Well, we'll go back 21 years. I really didn't care what was going on with Karen. Okay. Now I've spent a lot of time trying to get her to see doctors and take care of herself. But early on, it was hard. It would be very hard for a person early on in the disease to say that, but I can't tell you how important it is, because she let herself go because of me. And now that I have, you know, I am somewhat better and in control, I say to her, come on, you need to go take care of yourself now.
So when you say at the very beginning that you didn't care what was going on with Karen, or that you had trouble getting out of yourself, was that related to the depression that you mentioned having, or just feeling so overwhelmed by the diagnosis and what it might mean in your life?
I want to make something perfectly clear in this webinar. I really believe that depression played an enormous role in my MS life. When I was diagnosed with MS, I retreated to myself. I didn't want to talk to anybody. I didn't want to do anything. I no longer planned meals. I didn't care if we had friends in the house. I went to the TV. My clicker was my best friend. My dog sat next to me. That's all that mattered. And at the time, I thought I was crazy. I mean, I really thought I was going nuts. And my friends would say, I really think you need to go speak to someone. And I'm like, I don't want to talk to anybody, because if I talk to someone, then that means I'm crazy, and I'm not crazy. What I've learned since then is that depression is as much a symptom of MS as optic neuritis, the tingling that happens in my hands, and any other symptom of MS. And that makes me feel better, because I'm not crazy. And if I didn't speak to you, Roz, 21 years ago, I don't know where I would be today, because it was important to talk to someone that wasn't in my immediate family.
Great. So I just want to pick up on one thing here that Karen also said, and emphasize that. I don't think that Anne was alone in those feelings of being depressed and isolated and not really being able to reach out and support Karen at that time. And Karen mentioned the importance of having other supporters throughout the course of MS, I think, but particularly during that time. Karen needed to have her own support system, because Anne really couldn't be there for her until she started to feel better. So I think that building that support system for both people is critically important to living successfully with MS. I also think that education, in this case, primary progressive MS, both Isaac and Jan needed to learn what a diagnosis of primary progressive MS meant, because they needed to know how they could manage the disease. They needed health management strategies for both of them, including, rehabilitation, exercise options, how mobility aids could expand their lives and keep them busy and active and help Isaac stay independent, and getting help with things like sexual dysfunction and depression. So I think education is really key for both members of the partnership. And when able, they need to learn how to talk to each other to keep their relationship satisfying. And you'll see this as a theme with all of our stories, that each of these couples really needs to learn how best to communicate with one another in an open, respectful, caring way for the betterment of the relationship. And there are resources even for people living with significant MS symptoms who need mobility aids. People can still travel. They can engage in enjoyable activities, maybe the kinds of activities they always enjoyed in the past, or learning some new ones that they can do with the use of mobility aids and resources. And certainly a couple like Isaac and Jan need also to become familiar with the resources that can help them with financial planning, long-term planning, so they don't have to sit around and worry about it. They can just take the steps that they need to take to secure their futures for themselves.
Most of Tricia's MS symptoms are invisible. She has mood changes. She's angry. She's got irritability, grief. She's sad. Cognitive changes, problems with processing information, memory, attention, fatigue, uncomfortable sensory changes in her limbs. Trish doesn't recognize herself. Brian is left out in the cold. Their once solid, satisfying relationship is distant and lonely. Trish feels that she's can't find herself. She's angry at her body. Nothing's the same anymore. Brian feels abandoned by Trish and helpless in the face of her anger. He misses her wit, her organization, her problem solving, and she has no idea what happened to him. Communication is at a standstill, intimacy is out of the window, and the partnership is off kilter. Brian must be supportive, but he feels defeated in his efforts.
It sounds familiar.
Yeah, it really does sound familiar. Doesn't it sound familiar? I thought you were talking about me for a second. I really would,
So what's our first priority in helping Brian and Trish, AKA Ann and Karen? Would all of you vote here and help us figure out what we should be trying to do first? Oh, you guys are wonderful. You must have been listening to lots of our webinars. 69% of you say that they need education about mood and cognitive changes in MS, and I cannot tell you how right you are and how important that is for everybody living with MS, and particularly for this couple. So that's terrific. So, Anne, if you had gotten more information right at the beginning about depression and MS, or about some of the cognitive changes that started to happen, how would that have been for you early on? Would that have helped? Would it have been too scary and overwhelming? What do you think would have helped?
it wouldn't have been scary. The fact that I was depressed and I had no idea really what depression was, because I'm not a depressed person. So when I retreated and didn't want to be part of anything, it would have been great for someone to say to me, oh, it's a symptom, just like everything else you're feeling and you're going through. Then I could have accepted it as a symptom, just like everything else, and find what I needed to get me back on track. Getting back on track was helpful with talking with a therapist, you, and also, as I named it eventually, a happy pill. I needed to be on an antidepressant. That changed the course of the way I looked at things. I was back to what quote unquote normal was. I felt like I had a little bit of control back. I felt that just by taking a medicine that, is there to help in the relapsing remitting part of my disease was taking everything back and putting it back into some sort of control issue. And one thing before I forget it, people with cognitive issues need to educate other people. Okay. I was at a doctor's office and they're telling me certain things, and I'm like, you need to write this down, please, because I'm not going to remember it when I leave here. And she did, but there was, as I'm walking out of the office, I didn't even get to the elevator. I looked down at the paper and I needed more explanation on one of the things that she said. So I went back to the desk and I said, listen, I have to talk to somebody about this. I still don't get it. And if you don't ask for help, if you don't educate people to say, hey, listen, I've got a problem. I have MS. Cognitive issues is something that I'm dealing with, and I need you to help me with this. It's a lot like what I do with my students, Raj. You taught me that. I talked to them. I told them what MS was, and they understood, and they helped me be a better teacher because of that.
Could you just say, before we turn to Karen, and I will turn to Karen, but could you say a little bit more about how your students helped you when you explained to them about MS and your symptoms?
Well, first of all, I had a problem with writing, okay, because my right hand is affected by MS. And so I would say to the children, okay, I put the notes up on the board, or I'd be on an overhead, which they probably don't even exist anymore. Anyway, an overhead, and put the notes on the overhead. And if I forgot something, like if I couldn't remember a word or something from while I'm looking at the notes, I'd say, oh, gee, I forgot a word. I can't think of the word. I can't think of the word. And one of the kids would just yell out the word. And I said, that's perfect. And, it's better than the word I was thinking about. So I'm going to use it in the next class if it's all right with you. So, a lot of that they helped me with. Returning papers, they would come up to the front and get it from me so I didn't have to walk to them. They made me feel comfortable because I was honest with them, and I think they appreciated the honesty. And that's how I feel with all my friends too. I say, listen, this is the way it is. And it took a long time to get there. It wasn't something I did immediately, but with the students was a big part of why I could still teach for 35 years.
And just a side note for everybody, Anne put together an amazing MS walk team from the students at the high school. They all got together to support their favorite teacher and
250 at the biggest amount.
And to support the National MS Society's fundraising events. So she really had an impact on those kids. So Karen, I would just love to know your experience, if you could share a little of your experience of what it was like for you when this major change happened and Anne's diagnosed, but the symptoms are not visible to you. And they affected both Anne's mood and also the way she was thinking. What was that like for you?
It was that was the most difficult time. I think that I always tried to be the person that made things right. We could crack a joke and sort of get back centered, and none of that worked. So I was sort of at a loss for that. It was very difficult to understand what was going on with Anne. So she's newly diagnosed. You would expect her to be somewhat depressed, angry, sort of all those emotions that go through like a grieving process. That's really what we were doing, was going through a grieving process, and she kind of got stuck on angry. So it was really, at the time, I just thought we need to go talk to somebody because I don't know what else to talk to her about, and I can't get through to her. I didn't realize that she could probably be suffering from actual depression. And that was the first time I had been around somebody who was that depressed. It was a very lonely time for me. I was lucky that I had some very close friends that live nearby. But Anne just shut down. Like my evenings were spent with, and she took the dog. Okay, so that wasn't really fair.
You got
So
the cat.
my evenings were spent with me and the cat, and then she took the remote. So it was pretty much the cat and me, and it was a very lonely time. But I was blessed to have very good friends that I could talk to, and I would encourage anyone in a care partner situation to make sure they surround themselves either with family or friends that they can reach out to.
So if you were sitting in a room with Brian and Trish and trying to advise them on how to get to a better place from where they are now, Karen, what would your recommendation to them be?
Well, I'd recommend to Brian, try not to beat your head against the wall, because at some points you just feel you keep trying and trying and trying. And I think it's Brian's in a position to try and take a step back and really help both of them figure out next steps. So for me, what was important was to sort of have a goal and a plan that you could try to follow. So it gave you some empowerment. So let's go get education, whether Anne would come with me or not. You know, I would call people, I would try to call resources. We'd go to meetings. Sometimes she wouldn't listen. We came home from our first newly diagnosed meeting, and we had your card among other healthcare professionals that could help us, and she threw them away. So I had to go in the garbage and get them out. So, you know, there's a lot of patience, but try not to let the MS affect what relationship you had before. I think that can easily get lost. So, and that's a real communication piece. So you really have to, and also to kind of call it out. I mean, I was very protective of Anne. I didn't want to put any more stress on her by talking about what I thought was going on between us, or what we should be doing. I didn't want to stress her out because she was dealing with a lot, but in hindsight, I didn't allow us to be as communicative as we should have been. So, you know, sitting down with her and telling her how I was feeling. I rarely did that. Even if she didn't listen, if I could have said it out loud, like, you know, this isn't just about you. This is about us. This isn't just your diagnosis. This is our diagnosis. I'm living this alongside of you. And I may not have, you know, the physical symptoms and feeling the symptoms that you have, but I'm also dealing with this as well. So those would be some suggestions.
Mm-hmm. So in all of this, there's been a theme in all of the stories that we've gone through about how the support partner needs to do some self-care, whether it's talking up about feelings, just like you were just mentioning, telling Anne how you felt, or whether it's about making sure that a support partner is taking care of personal health and wellness, taking time for him or herself, paying attention to physical needs, emotional needs. But clearly, all of the support partners in these vignettes are feeling overwhelmed and have a lot of extra chores and tasks and responsibilities that they didn't have before the diagnosis. So I'm just curious how each of you, starting with Karen, I think, how you would recommend that support partners and people with MS talk about the emotional and physical needs that the support partner has. How can people make sure that support partners can take care of themselves without feeling guilty about it? And I know this is a toughie, but Karen, if, you know, in the best of all possible worlds, what would your advice be to support partners about getting self-care?
Oh, it is a tough one, Roz. Thanks. I think that I think support partners shouldn't be afraid to go by themselves to go talk with a professional. I think that that's a good place to start. That's something I wish that I had done. I wanted to make sure that, you know, Ann and I went together for a few times, and then Ann would go, but I stopped going to talk to, you know, a healthcare professional about what was going on. So I think I would encourage the support partner to think about doing that, or at least have some good conversations with close friends, you know, when perhaps the person with MS is not around. I think finding that time for yourself is important, and then sort of explaining that to the person with MS. Obviously, it depends what they're going through themselves, but if you can find a half hour a day to take the dog for a walk, or do some exercise, or go talk with friends, or you need even go out, you know, just say, look, I'm going to go out with some friends for a half hour. Would you like to join us? And if not, I need to go do that. So those are hard conversations to have, but I would encourage people to start having them.
Well, you know, Karen talks a mean game right now because it's 21 years later. But what we did early on, or at least in my opinion, what she did to me early on, was that because I had all these different things happening all at once, and I not being able to see out of one of my eyes, she was like, don't you go down those stairs. You're not allowed to do this. Don't do that. And if you're going to come down those stairs, you call me, I'll come get you. And then that made me feel like, wait a minute, you know, it is all about me. And now I'm not going to even think about you because you're putting all these things on me. And I think what has to happen when this diagnosis happens and you have a nice little relationship, you gotta talk. You have to say, listen, I understand. Don't treat me like a child. I won't go down the stairs. I'm not supposed to drive. But what did I do? Because I was so angry, I did all the things that she was telling me I couldn't do.
I'm sure that made a big hit.
Oh yeah, I got in a car. I put the dog in the car, and a friend. She wasn't home, and a friend. So don't you dare get out of that car right now. I mean, and coming down the stairs, I do. I'm coming down the stairs. You know, so don't put that kind of stuff on the person with MS. And then the two of us have to talk, which we do a lot now. We talk a lot about what's going on, but that it comes with time. I mean, that's something that you have to give it some time. But talking is the most important thing.
So learning how to communicate in ways that work for both of you may be something that we could really help couples with right from the get-go. Rather than waiting for crises, we could do a better job of alerting people to some of the challenges they might find communicating their feelings. So I think that's something we could do. The other thing I think, key messages that support partners don't always get, or people with MS, we now talk to support partners very directly about following the advice of the flight attendants on airplanes. You know, if there's a loss of oxygen in the cabin, an oxygen mask will come down, and you need to put on your own before you can take care of somebody else. And so it's not selfish. It is not selfish to take care of one's own health and well-being. It's self-sustaining. It's the thing that allows you to be your own best person and also take care of someone you love. So I think we need to kind of erase selfish from the vocabulary, because it just produces a lot of guilt and interferes with the communication that both Karen and Ann are saying is so important. So with that, we have a few key takeaways for you.
Well, when one person in the family is diagnosed with MS, it's shared by everyone. And that's the way it should be. It should be shared.
How long did it take you to get to the point of sharing it, Annie?
Couple years.
Yeah. Oh, just a few.
Yeah.
Just a few.
We're still working on it a little bit.
It is all about me, Roz, so it's hard.
That's
so,
another.
That's another webinar for another time.
Okay.
Like you said, it is important to put your own oxygen mask on. It's probably one of the hardest things to do, but it can make a difference. And the mood and cognitive symptoms, I think, are really challenging. The physical ones, although as challenging, certainly none of the symptoms are good. Even with Anne with her optic neuritis, like we figured out ways to drive her to work. She was mad that she couldn't drive, but it was really the mood and the cognitive symptoms that were the most difficult for me to deal with, because I didn't have any answers for those. And it seems like no matter what you did, it was sort of the wrong thing to do. So those were difficult.
There was many times I would say to Karen early on, I wish I had a more physical symptom that people could see, because that way it would be easier. They would understand what I was going through. I mean, one of the things I hate the most is when people say, oh, you don't look like you have MS. Oh, you're looking good. And I'm like, yeah, thanks.
So first of all, thank you both, Anne and Karen, for being so open and willing to share. I hope that all of you listening have gotten the very clear message that as healthcare providers, we need to be supporting the support partner as well as the person with MS, and they need to be supporting each other. And that's the only way to maintain, excuse me, effective, balanced partnerships that really work for both people. And I think you've probably gotten a very clear message from all three of us that the magic key to open all of that is communication. And as people at Can Do programs tell us all the time, communication isn't easy. Could you please tell us how to do it? And so we spend a lot of time actually teaching communication skills and how to have that go more smoothly. So we hope that you've gotten these key takeaways from the three of us.
All righty. Thank you so much, Roz and Anne and Karen. Anne and Karen, thank you so much for sharing your story and your journey. And to everyone out there, thank you for helping us with our hypothetical couples. And hopefully by looking at their situations and offering some advice, some light bulbs went on, and you got some ideas to bring your own situation to a better place by helping others. So again, thank you everyone for participating, and we're going to get to a few questions. We have a few minutes here, and actually, Anne, we received a question just to get some context of where you're at. How has Anne's MS progressed over the years, and where is she at in her MS journey at this point? So just give some people a little bit of context of your journey and where you're at now.
Well, I had I think two or three times where the MS relapsed, but all the symptoms have gone away except the things that you can't see. Like I always explain to people that my right side of my face feels like when you go to the dentist and you get Novocaine, except I can hit my jaw and I can feel it all the time. And it's been like that since 1997, this feel of numbness. And it's pretty much down my right side. I've learned to live with it. I never thought I would. I would always say, oh, it'll be going on Monday. It'll be going on Monday. And I can't tell you how many Mondays have passed. Right now, I'm dealing with the cognitive issues. That's really the thing that's driving me the most. I was very, very nervous about this webinar because I really feel like it's hard for me to put two words together sometimes. But I think I'm doing pretty well. I'm playing golf, so I can't be that bad.
Can't be that bad. Excellent. Well, we receive a lot of questions about a different relationship dynamics, but I'd actually like to start with an interesting question that says, please address finding support partnerships for those living alone without family in the vicinity. So for those that don't have a partner, don't have family nearby, what advice do you all have to even start establishing some of these support partnerships?
So I'll start. I think that is a challenge, and you just need to remember that support partners come in all different shapes, sizes, and forms. It can be a best friend. It can be somebody that you connect with on the internet in an online support group. It can be a neighbor that you form a close relationship. So it's not always a spouse or partner who becomes your support network. So I think it's opening yourself up to the possibilities, being open with people around you, getting to know them just as you would have done without MS in your life, and finding people that you really connect to. Because a support partnership is a two-way street, like a good friendship. And so when you find people that you like and enjoy, and you find ways to support them, they will in turn support you. So I think there's that. And then there's also the fact that people with MS meet and date and connect and marry, even with a diagnosis of MS. So there are lots of ways to build a support network that's filled with satisfying support partnerships.
I think that also other people with MS can be a real support partner for you. So I know Anne used to work with she's been on different medications, and some of the drug companies had sort of support advocates. And she, would reach out to people, or people would call her and have a discussion, usually surrounded the drug, but then certainly went on to other things like cognition and sharing some ideas about what symptoms they might be having and how they kind of got through it. And Anne has shared her expertise and like helpful things that she's done to cope, like with what she used to do with the kids in the classroom. So I've seen Anne be a good care partner for somebody else with MS in some instances.
Yeah, it was mostly phone conversations because the internet as it exists today didn't exist back then. But I was, I helped a lot of people in that way.
Karen, I'd like to direct this question first to you. This one says, I'm a support partner, and my biggest issue is the image of MS. The disease is very scary. MS equals disability. And this fearful mindset is creating a wall. How do you overcome the fear and just that image of MS?
That's difficult. I mean, it's the first thing I know. When Anne was first diagnosed, I'm like, well, here we go. She'll be in a wheelchair in X number of years, and we're gonna have to figure that out. So the disease is a very individual disease. How it progresses in everybody is very different. So I think we've learned to live more in the moment and try to do the things that we can do now. Because and I've said to Anne, I said, I could be in a car crash tomorrow and be the one in a wheelchair. So we don't really know what life is going to throw any of us. So we've tried to live a little bit more in the moment, do things when we have the ability to do them, whether it be travel or just do things for ourselves with friends and family, because you never know. Nobody ever knows. And so that's sort of the way that we've dealt with it.
Do you remember what you said to me that one time that really shook, about you'd wail if I ended up in a wheelchair? You would push it up Mount Everest, but it had to be a real person in there, and that's important. It's important.
Yeah, well, because you weren't yourself at the time, so
no.
And I think that sometimes support partners find that challenge not just with the person they're taking care of, but other people outside, just neighbors, friends who have an image of what MS is. And they may tend to back away or be frightened because they have this image of disability. And I think what Karen was saying is really important, that whether you're talking to each other or you're talking to other people, this is what our MS is. It's not your Aunt Millie who was, in a nursing home, or somebody else who was absolutely fine and had no symptoms at 85. Our MS that we're living with in our house is ours, and we're happy to tell you about it and let you know where we are at this point in time. And so you're educating the people around you so that they're not uncomfortable or put off by the concept of disability.
It's great advice. Thanks, Roz. And I'd like to ask you, we talked a lot about invisible symptoms, and certainly one of the most common invisible symptoms is fatigue and this debilitating just sweeping of being tired. And so we received one question that they, them and their partner set up a lot of plans to communicate and set out time to talk and do things together, and then they get wiped out and the fatigue takes over. So how do you overcome and cope with that inescapable fatigue to even get yourself in that position to have these kind of conversations?
Well, that's a hard one because I don't have the symptom of fatigue a lot, but what I would tell people is that you do what you can, you take breaks, get in the shade a little bit, and then continue. But again, it's a conversation that the two people need to have, so you don't push each other too far.
I mean, it can be frustrating for the care partner. You've worked all day, you come home, you've planned this time to be with the person, and they're like, well, I'm just wiped, I need to go to bed. So it's sort of a two-way street that maybe, we changed up our schedule a little bit. So I figured out how I could stay home in the morning later, which was Anne's better time, rather than
I'm much
late
better
at night
during the day.
So I would try to do my work schedule, and a lot of my work is in the afternoon and late at night anyhow. So we've tried to carve out some more meaningful time when we knew her energy was at its best. So I would stay home in the morning, and that's when we could talk. That's when we could do things. That's when we could maybe go for a walk or, and then sort of give up that nighttime, just knowing that that's not going to work for her. So sometimes you have to be a little creative and try to find the time when the person has the most energy and see if that's a time that you can capture together.
Great, thank you. To go back to the theme of fear, we do have quite a few family members joining us, and we received a couple questions that they're having a hard time connecting and being invested as support partners, because in the back of their mind that there's fear that MS is hereditary and now they may get it as well. So Roz, can you tell us a little bit about MS and the hereditary nature of it, and what advice that maybe you would give to these family members to recognize that, but then also to move on and move forward and cope together?
Absolutely, glad to. So MS is not a directly inherited disease. It's not like blue eyes or brown hair, or even some diseases like Huntington's, for example, which is determined by a single gene. We do know, however, that there is a genetic component, and they've now identified, I think, close to 200. I'm not exactly sure of the precise number, but of genetic variations that are in some way associated with getting multiple sclerosis. So in spite of how it may feel to some of you sitting out there, it's not actually that easy to get MS. It's a combination of a genetic predisposition in somebody who then encounters a stimulus in the environment that's still unidentified at a particular point in time, and the disease occurs. So we know that in the general population, about 1 in 750 people develop multiple sclerosis. If a person has a very close relative, a parent, a sibling, a child who has MS, then the risk is increased to about 1 in 40. So there's a significant increase in risk when you have a family member, but it's still a very low risk. And it's important to remember that the majority of people with MS have no family member who has the disease. So I think you can't just put aside the fact that there's a genetic component, but there is so many there are so many other things that actually are more important to your risk. If you smoke, stop, because smoking increases a person's risk of getting MS, and it makes MS progress more quickly. And if you stop smoking, it actually reverses some of the disease process. And we have a lot more control over smoking than we have over the genes that we're born with. If you have health problems, other health problems, what we call comorbidities, particularly cholesterol, high blood pressure, diabetes, those comorbidities are more common in people with MS. So the better you take care of your overall health, the less your risk is. And if you do get MS, you want to take care of those comorbidities because they also make MS progress more quickly. So I think the answer, Brian, is that people really need to focus on the things they can actually take control of and manage, rather than worrying about the genetic risk, which is actually pretty low.
Great, thank you, Roz. You mentioned that support partners come in all shapes and sizes. So we have one viewer that says that I consider one of my strongest partnerships is my employer. They know I have MS, but my cognition is starting to be impaired. And this may be right up your alley. How do you talk to that employer and balance that relationship as being a support partner that you want to confide in, but also your employer?
Well, when I was diagnosed with MS, the superintendent of schools came to the hospital and said, she'd rather have me in the classroom than a sub any day of the week. So to get back as quickly as I could. I think the more honest you can be with the people that you work with is the best advice I can give. I was very honest eventually. It didn't happen all at once, but I was honest with the people I worked with. I was honest with the students I taught, for sure. But I would explain to your employer that you're having some cognitive issues, and that you're doing your best. You're going to make lists. You're going to do whatever it takes to remember things, and hopefully everything will work out. I mean, I do that now. I sometimes I'm a hostess at a restaurant, and I tell my boss, I said, listen, I'm going to do the best job that I can, but I'm having some cognitive issues and I may mess up some things. And they're okay with that, because honesty to me is the best policy.
So can I weigh in on that just briefly, Brian? Because I think that although Anne's situation worked out very well with the school system, and they were incredibly supportive and made some accommodations for her to allow her to be as comfortable and productive in her teaching as she could be, and they valued her very much. Not all employers are that supportive or understanding. And so I really encourage any of you who have questions about whether to disclose in the workplace, how to disclose in the workplace, that you contact the National MS Society and speak to one of the navigators who can give you very good information about when, under what circumstances, and how to disclose in ways that best protect your rights in the workplace. Again, some employers are very supportive and helpful, some are not. And you need to know your rights and how best to protect yourself so that you can stay employed as long as you want to and are able.
Right, certainly an individual decision. So, but thank you for sharing your story, Anne. Karen, we received a couple questions from support partners on how to encourage your family member, your partner, to ask for assistance when you know that they need it, but they're not going to ask for it. So do you have any tips or insights on how to encourage that person to ask for assistance?
Yeah, that is a tough one. I guess, and not much worked for me at the beginning, I will say that. Anne's fairly bribable, though, so we were able to bribe her on
Yeah.
a few occasions
Mm-hmm.
with food and drink. But so I guess if you can stress to the, the person with MS that this, by them asking you, it helps you. It really, and it sets up a better dynamic. So Anne talked a little bit about how overprotective I became, and the reason I did that was because she wasn't communicating to me what her needs were. Like, so I had to kind of guess, and I always err on the side of caution because that's just who I am. So I wanted to protect her as much as I could, and that obviously frustrated her. So, if you could encourage the person to, like, I want to help you, but I don't want to be overbearing. And the only way I can do that is if you talk to me and tell me what your needs are, how I can help you, when I should leave you alone. So I think that that's probably the best way to go at it.
I think one way for people to think about it is that no matter how much another person loves you, and this goes both ways between partners, no matter how much another person loves you, he or she can't read your mind. And we may wish that somebody could read our mind and know when we're so tired and scared that we can't function, and when we're feeling strong and want to go it alone, but people can't. And so it's not a matter of not loving you or not being sensitive. It's just impossible to read your mind. And so the more open you can be, yes, thank you, I could really use your help right now, or no, thanks, today, right now, I'm feeling good, I want to go it on my own, but I'll let you know when I do need your help.
Great advice. Thank you. So we have time for a couple more questions. We talked a lot about balanced relationships and trying to make sure that the relationship is balanced. Roz, can you just take a step back and just define what balance means in a relationship, and what questions should each partner be asking themselves to determine whether or not that they feel that the relationship is in balance?
So I think most couples find over time that their relationship develops a kind of structure, a rhythm, a day-to-day rhythm that people take for granted, with each person having a certain set of responsibilities. I had one couple many years ago. It's not politically correct anymore, but they talked about who had the girl jobs and who had the boy jobs. And they took them very seriously. They each contributed a lot to the running of the household, the caring for the children, the maintaining their lives. And then when one of them got MS and was not able to do some of those established role-related jobs, the other partner took on more and more and more, and suddenly they turned around and everything felt out of whack. The wife felt as though she was doing all of the giving, the doing, the taking care of, and the husband was starting to feel like he wasn't contributing anything. He wasn't needed. He wasn't valued in the family because there were so many things he couldn't do. So that relationship was out of balance. It was out of whack. And what you want to do, I think, is to redefine your roles a little bit, trade off on tasks. If somebody can't do the more physical things, to take on some of the less physical things, because ultimately each person needs to be a valued contributor. Otherwise, nobody feels good. One feels resentful, the other feels worthless, and it's very uncomfortable. So balance means that it's a mutually satisfying relationship for both partners.
Great. Well, we'll wrap up with one more question that we've covered, but I think it's a good way to tie everything together. And the question is, how can I help my caregiver and make them feel truly appreciated while still keeping the normalcy and without making everything about the MS and going overboard? But how can I help them and make them feel appreciated?
Annie, that's for you.
Oh boy, how do we make
Flowers, dinner,
candy? Yeah.
any of all the above. Yeah.
Well, I think trying to do the things that you always did before. cooking the dinner, getting dinner ready, doing the laundry, doing the things that I would always do, making the plans. So that was one thing that Karen doesn't have to worry about, is what's going on in the house. And like I said, now my concentration is to say to her, thank you for what you did. She put up with a lot. I was not a good camper. And now the way I want to help her out is by kind of pushing her to get to the doctor.
I think the best way to show your appreciation is to ask, how are you today? Because the caregivers always, are you okay? What can I get you? And just to have somebody turn to you and say, hey, how are you doing today?
Yeah, like when you come home from work, always say, how did your day go?
Right.
Always asking.
That's great.
All right. Well, better myself.
Here we go. Well, thank you again so much to Ann and Karen for sharing your stories and your ideas, and thank you to Roz for all the great work that you do to help support partners and help families living with MS. And again, thank you all for joining and taking your Tuesday night to learn a little bit more, and hopefully you got some ideas to better your situation. And we always like to provide more resources. So the first resources I would love to tell you about is right on your toolbar. There's an infographic that Roz helped create on strengthening support partnerships, and there's also a PDF copy of tonight's slides, so you can go back and reference anything that we talked about tonight. The presentation will also be archived on our website, which is candums.org. And while you're there, take advantage of all the other programs that CanDoMS has to offer, both in person at cities across the country, and also online. We do a monthly webinar series on all sorts of different topics. Can Do On Demand, which has some great online learning opportunities. And the Ask the Can Do team, which if we didn't get to answer your question tonight, you can ask a question online, and we'll go to our team of healthcare experts and MS experts and try to get those answered for you, and then post them online so we can all share in that great information. So we hope you continue to learn, continue to be part of the Can Do MS family. Again, it's cando-ms.org. And definitely, as I mentioned, go to mspath2care.com. This is the third of our webinar series, so you can see the other two webinars in our series and see all sorts of other resources that are out there. So again, thank you so much for joining us this evening, Ann, Karen, and Roz. Any closing thoughts for our audience tonight?
Well, to me, it feels like things have come full circle. So it is a great pleasure to work with you, Ann and Karen, and thanks to all of you for joining us tonight. Thanks, Brian, for leading us through it.
Oh. Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Brian.
Thanks,
Roz.
Thank you, everyone. I hope you have a good night, and we'll see you again soon. Thank you.
Take care.
Night.